Blunt weapons are the class of weaponry in Cyberpunk 2077 which happens to be comprised of the most everyday household items. Things such as baseball bats, tire irons, and pieces of pipe. Indeed, blunt weapons act as a reminder that pretty much anything found around Night City with an elongated shape can be used to defend yourself. But when we're faced with a messy assortment of things you found in your dad's garage, or god forbid your mum's top drawer, it falls to somebody to lay these items out, test them in combat before weighing up their pros and cons to decide once and for all which is best. If you've been enjoying the series thus far, then don't forget to like the video and sub to the channel for more content like this. Thanks. Now let's get into it. As always, let's quickly outline the general build I'm using in this video. Since blunt weapons are directly boosted by the Street Brawler perk tree, which is part of the body attribute, I've spec'd the whole 20 points into body, and bought up all the perks from that section. I also bought some from athletics for a nice health boost, since the close quarters combat of melee can often result in us taking a lot of damage. I scaled this back at certain points of the video down to these perks to test the weapons out at lower levels, but any combat inside the Wraith camp was with a fully spec'd character. I then spec'd 18 points as always into tech, since it allows us to craft legendary gear. After that, I spec'd into cool and cold blood to make it so that as long as enemies kept dying, I wouldn't. These weapons aren't quite as powerful as katanas on the whole, meaning we need a good defense as well as offense. As for cyberware, we're again sticking with the self-preservation tactic, with items like the Second Heart, Biomonitor, and Pain Editor. I first tried these with Berserk, which works very well and complements the strength-oriented tank build. However, I also tried switching to the Dynalar Mark III Sandevistan with low cooldown, which really helps to avoid taking as much damage at lower levels. Now that we're clear on that, onto the weapons. Down at the bottom, we have the steel pipe, a prime example of how pretty much anything seems to be making its way into this weapon class. It's a reasonably common weapon found on lower tier goons around Night City, and despite its original purpose being to transport fluids from one place to another, it does also function as an effective blunt instrument. Hell, with a 20% bleed chance, we could still technically say that it's fulfilling its primary directive. In fact, it turns out that battering people with a sturdy piece of metal pipe does actually allow for fast swings and therefore effective DPS. To acquire a legendary variant, if you say, I don't know, want to play a lowly street kid who's still powerful enough to take out entire gangs with an everyday piece of plumbing equipment, then head over to the melee vendor on West Wing Estate for the crafting spec, or the Animals Gym in Rancho Coronado for the real deal. And get your eddies ready, because despite the fact that you can get something like this from B&Q in real life for about £3.64, or $4, in Cyberpunk 2077 it's going to cost you 38,500 eddies. That's a short plumbing course, more expensive than my 3-year university tuition right there. And is it worth it? Well, when there's other vastly superior items on this list available for free, I would say a resounding no. In a similar vein to the steel pipe, we next have the tire iron, a weapon very alike in stats which I believe is probably just a retexture of the same base item. The only reason this one isn't last place is largely down to my own headcanon. A tire iron is at least designed to be a handheld tool and also features a pointy end. We don't use that end admittedly, but it's more reassuring to know that it's there. Again, the weapon has a good swing for what it is, and in the right leveled up hands can be more than effective enough for taking out enemy bases. Just like the steel pipe, this one can be acquired from West Wing Estate for the crafting spec and the Animals Gym for the ready-made item. Again, the spec will cost you 38 grand, but the item will cost you 50 grand. That, along with the steel pipe, therefore, have got to be two of the most ridiculously overpriced video game items I have ever seen, and I would strongly advise anyone not to fall for this scam. Working our way up the common household items, we next have the monkey wrench. This big heavy thing is no doubt a little bit better at clobbering enemies than the previous two. Now, one thing I will say about this definitely retextured selection of the same base item is that they all do sound different. The wrench actually has a bit of a rattle, accounting for the moving parts of the tightening mechanism. It's commonly used among scavengers who no doubt acquired it way cheaper than I'm about to go and buy one for. Now, here's a very useful tip with the Animals Weapon Vendor, because as of patch 1.6, the guy's actual vending area is bugged. It's marked as a hostile environment, meaning going in there will cause him to become hostile, and he'll be stupidly ruining his household item scam business. Ladies and gentlemen, we have to buy from this man without him knowing we're there. Now, my solution was to activate optical camo before approaching him. However, for more early game players, using Whistle to summon him to you will also work. An annoying bug, but somewhat funny nonetheless. Anyway, there's another 38 grand gone, and our collection of world's most expensive garage tools has a new addition. Now, I promise the next item will be something a little more interesting and different, but first, the crowbar is a favourite for burglars and thieves across Night City. Its classic design would make one assume that we could use it in place of strength checks or gorilla arms to force open doors. Alas, this annoyingly isn't the case, demoting the crowbar to yet another simple but somewhat effective weapon which can again be bought for 38 grand from the West Wing Estate weapon vendor. Of the 4 basic blunt instruments so far, this one definitely feels like the fastest, even though I know statistically they're exactly the same. This one wins out then on the merit that we can roleplay as Gordon Freeman from the Half-Life franchise, a nod that even the devs themselves give to the weapon by describing it as, quote, the favourite tool of burglars and theoretical physicists from MIT. Overall, I found this iconic weapon in Cyberpunk 2077 to be quite a satisfying experience, especially when goons were randomly blasted backwards with seemingly overly extreme force. I can't wait to experience those physics in full VR on an omnidirectional treadmill, and Half-Life 3 debuts sometime after 2077. Our first two-handed weapon on this list, the hammer, can again be acquired either from the Animals or West Wing Estate, and is one of the slowest swinging weapons there is. It does make up for it though in the sheer amount of damage output. Indeed, I can't describe it any better than the devs themselves, that with a hammer in your hand, every problem looks like a nail. And indeed, swinging a giant two-handed hammer at your foes is one surefire way to get the job done. In addition to this, using a hammer to block is also a pretty effective tactic, since you can hold it above your head with both hands. But to reiterate something I brought up when ranking the katanas, there really aren't that many enemies in this game wherein you need to employ these mechanics. Most groups predominantly use guns, including all but 2 of the Animals members in this gym. Beat on the Brat is fists only, and Oda is just one boss fight. Okay, there's a few more cyber psychos and such, but for the most part, this blocking mechanic is useless, since we can't deflect bullets with it. For the most part then, the best way to use a hammer is to swing at people as much as you can, and hope to down them before they down you. This can be somewhat aided by the 20% bleed chance, but still mostly involves flailing your arms and hoping for the best. Sasquatch's hammer is a variant, but doesn't get its own rank because A, it's not iconic, and B, it's no different to the regular hammer apart from probably being worse. For me at least, after defeating Sasquatch, I was only able to pick up a common Sasquatch hammer. Not exactly the most useful addition when entering the higher level parts of the game. At number 8, we have the regular electric batons, a common staple of law enforcement and Militech personnel. These are electrically charged stun devices designed to incapacitate any troublemakers. They're a pretty common sight around Night City and a decent early game melee weapon, due to their fast attack time and ability to shock and stun foes. Now, I gotta tell you, there's something pretty satisfying about facing down small armies with a tiny extendable stick like this, and the electrical sound is pretty nice too. Have a listen. Be warned though, because in this instance our friendly Animals weapon vendor has taken his rip-off scam business a step further. You see, technically, the batons come in 3 different types, skin variants if you will, those being Alpha, Beta, and Gamma, and the vendor will sell you each one separately for 38,500 a piece. Do not be caught out by this. There is no statistical or effective difference between each one. They look slightly, and I mean very slightly as in you wouldn't know if I didn't tell you, level of difference. If you want to acquire a legendary spec for one, and I don't blame you, it's a very decent and effective weapon, then just pick one and roll with that. Or better still, try and find it as part of some RNG loot out in the world. Now this I really like. The Kanabo is a weapon used by samurai in feudal Japan and serves as an excellent side piece alongside a katana-wielding build. The name literally translates to metal stick, or metal club, and it serves in a very similar fashion to the game's baseball bats. To acquire this one, you're going to have to hop on board your Scorpion Apollo and venture out into the Jackson Plains part of the Badlands. Out here, we can meet a former heavyweight boxing champion who's decided to step away from city life and live on her lonesome in this caravan in the middle of nowhere. And you know what? Fair enough. Sometimes the ad-infested metropolis of Night City can be a little too much. If we speak to her, we can buy ourselves an epic level Kanabo, and annoyingly, despite my efforts, I've been unable to find anything legendary. If I had, then no doubt this would rank higher than the baseball bat itself, because it looks so much cooler. However, despite only being epic, the Kanabo is still highly effective in combat, and like I said, would make a fine non-lethal addition to a samurai build. You could go katana most of the time and then switch over to this for opponents you don't want to kill, like cyber psychos for example. Even on its own though, it's more than enough with a bit spec'd into strength and makes a sound with a crunch as opposed to the bonk sound of the baseball bat. Speaking of which, the baseball bat is indeed an endorsement of the horny jail meme, at least in the way it sounds. Have a listen. It is definitely quite the clunk. Unlike the Kanabo though, we can source a legendary regular bat, and from a pretty easy location, that being Coach Fred in V's apartment building, who'll sell it to you for 50 grand. Okay, so is everyone in this game just out to rip us the hell off? I mean, the most I can find a quality baseball bat for in real life is $50. And yes, I get that it's a game, but I mean, come on, guns I get, or maybe I don't because we don't really sell them in the UK, so I can look at a 60 grand gun and think, okay, yeah, sounds reasonable, maybe. But baseball bats, now we have those here, and I'm not going to be so easily fooled. I mean, I get that there's been a lot of inflation between now and 2077, but a baseball bat should not cost just slightly less than 1 month's rent for a high-end apartment. Anyway, all that said, if you do bite the bullet and fork out 50 grand, or just get lucky and find one on the street, then one bonus is that you can put on a leather jacket and cosplay everyone's favourite hero villain from The Walking Dead. Indeed, swinging this thing at enemies, I do feel a bit like swinging my hips and saying cocky one-liners.
Little pig, let me in.
Now, it's just a shame that we can't carry an assortment of balls or even junk that we can straight up swing into our foes, like an expansion of the throwing knife mechanic. Now, wouldn't that be awesome? Tinker Bell is essentially an iconic Baton retextured to look like a cattle prod. It's 30% less damaging than normal, but does have a 20% chance to knock out enemies with strong attacks, making it somewhat like this game's equivalent of Mehrunes Razor. You can acquire this one in the control room at Edgewood Farm during Riverward's questline, wherein you fight one of the nastiest and most screwed up people featured in the game, Anthony Harris. It'll be rare when you pick it up, but can be upgraded to legendary with the right perks. Now, something I do really like about the texture of this weapon is the electricity bolts seen at the top. To me, it looks a bit like a lightning wand and will make for a fine melee weapon on the Storm Wizard build I've decided to develop after using the Yinglong SMG. I also really love the noise this one makes. It's not too overly fantastical or electric, but rather sounds like a piece of buzzing static. It's more reserved, but also more realistic, and I respect it for being so. Just remember to mostly do heavy swings with it, as that's the only way the knockout ability will take effect. Next up, we have a weapon which genuinely hails from another dimension. Those who've played the Witcher 3 Hearts of Stone DLC will no doubt be aware of the Caretaker, a character who even in the context of the Witcher world was summoned from another dimension still. As his name would suggest, he tends to the grounds of the Von Everec estate, wielding a supernatural spade which doubles as both a tool and a weapon. After defeating the Caretaker, we can there too recover said tool/weapon. Now in the Witcher it has a drain vitality effect, wherein 10% of the damage dealt is then used to heal Geralt. Similarly, in Cyberpunk, it does appear to administer some healing to V directly upon contact with an enemy. Now, granted, I do have some perks which boost health regeneration in this way, but having done this same camp with every blunt instrument, I gotta say, the effect definitely seems to be more powerful with the Caretaker's Spade than anything else. It's an awesome weapon, and the blue glow when swinging is such a cool otherworldly touch. Annoyingly, it can't be acquired until the endgame, and even then, we have to choose a specific one. Knocking on Heaven's Door with Rogue will land us on a jungle floor of the Arasaka Tower, with the shovel spawning in a variety of places within the first room. It took me a little while to find, but from what I can tell, there are several spawn points around this table here. Now, unlike some weapons, we do get to keep this one upon returning to the point of no return. Now, the big question is, does the presence of the Caretaker's Spade confirm that Cyberpunk and The Witcher are set in the same multiverse? Does the Arasaka Corporation have an otherworldly entity tending the grounds of their high-altitude rainforest? After all, it's highly likely that Ciri has spent some time in the Cyberpunk world, and the new Witcher update even gave us an FF06B5 reference. I'm fairly certain that CDPR by doing this must be placing their two worlds together somewhat. Now, whether they'll actually cross over properly is pretty doubtful. Were that the case, then it would have been all too easy to give Ciri a brief cameo in this game. You know what's better than a regular baseball bat? Well, if you said a gold-plated spiked baseball bat, then you would be correct. This thing used to belong to Denny, who once served as the drummer of Johnny's samurai band. During the quest's second conflict, she'll at one point toss it into her pool, after which we can retrieve it. That's something I definitely make sure to do, since this thing comes with a 20% chance to stun, which becomes 25% when using heavy attacks. Guess those gold-plated spikes can be a bit of a knockout. What's more, they also offer an 80% extra bleed chance, and by adding 20% 50% quite easily with perks, this becomes a weapon which applies bleed on every hit, making it way more powerful than the base version. With that great combination of stun and bleed, single hits to enemies will very often incapacitate them and finish them off before they recover. As far as our Negan cosplay endeavors go, I'm not sure which is more similar to Lucille. Sure, this one is spiked, but it's also gold. Still, as far as I'm concerned, if Negan were to pick one of the two bats, I don't doubt that this would have been his choice. Luckily, this thing is only gold plated and not solid gold, because if my childhood with Minecraft has taught me anything, it's that gold weapons break after several hits. Now, ladies and gentlemen, we come to the one that you've been waiting for. And as much as it saddens me to do this, I am going to have to blur it out just to be safe. YouTube have been annoyingly vague on their rules lately, especially when it comes to gaming. In fact, if you see any blur at the start of some of my previous videos, then that is why. Sorry about all that, it's very annoying for me as well. Sir John Phallustiff is the pleasure tool of Meredith Stout and something we can acquire from our one-night stand bed after doing all that professional Militech business. Side with her during the pickup, text later that you'd like to see her again, and you'll eventually wind up at the No-Tell Motel. Make sure you have nudity turned on or you'll end up with a regular Baton, which would be a crying shame because as much as this is clearly the game's joke weapon, it actually has more DPS than anything else on this list, at least in my inventory anyway. On top of physical, it also deals electrical damage. 3 guesses why. Wielding it, we will constantly be able to hear the sound of vibrations. Clearly this device isn't designed to inflict pain on the crime of Night City, but rather another word beginning with P. I also love how the description reads, quote, perfect for when someone is just asking to get fucked, end quote. CDPR, you are absolutely correct in that assessment from all manner of perspectives, and we can watch our enemy's pride crumble as our crit chance rises. Now, whilst I'd love to do a full build incorporating every innuendo in this game, you know, this, the penetrator weapon mod, etc., I'm afraid that YouTube deem you all far too innocent to be exposed to that nasty grown-up stuff. But who knows, maybe if a cooldown for optical camo winds up in the game so we can constantly just be invisible, then it just might be possible, with a good amount of editing. Finally, however, at number 1, Cottonmouth tops my list for the game's blunt weapons for a number of reasons. The iconic Cane of Fingers can firstly be acquired pretty early on during the Automatic Love questline. You know, the same mission where we crucially decide whether to punch the dude or not. Well, punch or no punch, after the conversation finishes, we are more than free to head over to this table and take the man's iconic cane. This deals both electrical and chemical damage, which can also apply poison and or shock effects. It easily tops this list for me, simply down to the sheer quantity of lingering damage which can be inflicted upon each hit. Here, when fighting these top tier wrestlers at the Animals Gym, having leveled myself right down on very hard mode, I found it to easily be the most effective blunt weapon. It may not have as much base contact damage as Sir John, however, the insane blue or green numbers from poison or shock applied afterwards do make this, in my opinion, the more powerful and versatile of the two. What's more, where Sir John is locked out for any players who don't romance Meredith, Cottonmouth is available to all, and again won't be affected or indeed affect your relationship with Fingers. I also like to imagine that Fingers gets upset upon losing one of his favourite things, and even though the game seriously punishes us for punching him, I can at least in my own headcanon see this as a different form of revenge. Powerful, free, and definitely worth taking, making it the number 1 blunt item at the top of my list. But let me know whether you actually use any of these blunt instruments in Cyberpunk 2077, as well as which is your favourite and why. Has anyone actually done a Negan build or a Street Kid who exclusively uses ridiculously overpriced household items? I'm curious. Anyway, thank you very much for watching. I've got a lot more Cyberpunk content on the way, and I hope to see you soon in another video.